Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sam's Bead Shop. My name is Rachel Siegel. I'm excited to show you today how to make this Venice bracelet. This is a bracelet that I designed to really show off Czech Glass cathedral beads. This is a really gorgeous shape of Czech Glass beads. It has a lot of facets, a lot of details. They're really a beautiful bead. So this design really reminded me of the architecture in Venice and throughout Italy. We have the beautiful cathedral beads as well as this trim of seed beads all the way around. That almost look like kind of the peaks and the domes on top of a cathedral in Italy. So I can't wait to show you how to make this. Let's get started. This bracelet is 7 inches long. It has about 5 inches of beading as well as 2 inches of tiara cast components and clasps. You do have the option of making this shorter or longer, and I will talk more about that later on. So let's go through the materials that you'll need for this bracelet. First up, you will need your cathedral Czech glass beads. These are in the 8mm size. I use 28 pieces for this bracelet, and that means I will need 2 strands, as these are 22 pieces to a strand. You will also need some Toho round 8/0 seed beads. I used about 2/3 of this 2.5-inch tube. This one is in the perma-finish galvanized rose gold color, which has a little bit of a kind of copper hue to me, so I thought it looked nice with some of the copper components. Next, there are a few pieces of tiara cast components that you will need as well. First up are the tiara cast stitch-in hammer tone links. You will need 2 of these, 1 for each end. You will also need a clasp. I chose the tiara cast magnetic clasp. I just find this so easy and usable to wear. It just makes it really easy to put on and off the bracelet yourself. And lastly, you will need some jump rings. I went with the 3x4mm oval jump rings. You'll need 2 at a minimum so that you can attach your clasp at either end, but you might want to have a couple more to lengthen the bracelet if you need it longer than 7 inches. And if you need it shorter than 7 inches, I'd recommend just using less beads. You'll be able to make 1 less of these rings down your bracelet. Lastly, there are a couple of basic materials that you need. You will need some Beadalon Wildfire. This is in the 0.006 inch size. I'm going for the black color, but you could use whichever you think is a good fit for your bracelet. And lastly, you will need some needles. And for the needles, I am using a size 10 hard beading needle from Beadalon. To get started, I've cut approximately 80 inches of thread. I have added that onto my needle and folded over at the top. Usually I only fold over my thread a few inches, but in this case I did it a little bit longer, just so that my thread is a little easier to work with since it is so long. So let's get started by adding our beads. First I'll add 1 of the 8mm cathedral beads, then one of the 8/0 beads, and I will repeat that 3 more times. Here's what the bead should look like on your thread. So we have 4 of the cathedral beads and 4 of the 8/0s in this pattern. I'm going to bring those close to the end, but I still want to leave a 10 to 12 inch tail. That way I'll still have room at the end to weave in the thread and attach some of the metal components that I'll need on this end. Next, I'm going to bring my needle back through the first 8mm bead that we threaded on. This will turn this into a loop. So we've brought that into a round. My tail thread is here at the top. My working thread is coming out at the bottom there. And now I want to go back through all of these beads one more time to reinforce this first loop. I've now gone all the way around again to have that second ring reinforcing it. And now I'm going to continue through a few more beads. So let's go through the 8/0 here, the 8mm, the 8/0, and one more 8mm. So now my tail thread's on one end and my working thread is on the other side. Next, let's pick up one of our 8/0 seed beads, an 8mm cathedral, and repeat that 2 more times. And then end that with one more 8/0 seed bead. I'll bring all those beads down. Now I will bring my needle through this 8mm cathedral that I am coming out of here, and I'm going to go through it from the other side. And that will make our next ring of beads. Let's continue through the 8/0, the 8mm, the next 8/0, and the 8mm again. Now we've completed another section of right angle weave. We are going to continue to do this until we have the full length of our bracelet. So I will show you that one more time. Here is the pattern of beads that I'm going to be stringing on each time. So you can see I have 8/0 followed by the 8mm. That happens 2 more times, plus an 8/0 at the end. And then I go back through that first 8mm cathedral, going through from the other side that my thread is. That is another ring added, but since we're going to keep adding to this end, we need to bring our thread back over, and you're just going to keep going till you're going through this 8mm cathedral. And now I will continue that the length of my bracelet. And now I am on my last ring to add. Added on my beads. I'll bring them down and then bring it back through this cathedral bead to make the full loop. And lastly, I'll bring my thread to the last cathedral bead. And now we have made the kind of core of our bracelet, the full length that we need it. So I have 9 loops of beads. If you wanted to make this shorter, you could definitely just do 7 or 8 loops of beads, whichever will be the right fit for you or for whoever you're making this bracelet for. Now that we've made the base of our bracelet, now we get to add the embellishments that I think just make this bracelet really stand out and really special. So right now we are coming out of this cathedral bead. I'm going to go through one of the 8 beads next to it. And that puts me in the perfect spot to start adding my embellishment around this cathedral bead. So I'm going to pick up 6 8 beads. All right, let me check that. All right, so we've got 6 of those. Let's bring them down. And then I'm going to take those down. Now I'm going to take my needle and go through the 8 that is on the other side of this cathedral. So now you've made this little seed bead dome around your cathedral bead, this beginning of our embellishment. We want to keep doing that down the length of our bracelet. So again, I'm going to go through the next 8 bead right there. Add 6 8 seed beads. Bring those down. And then take my needle and go through the 8 that's on the other side of this cathedral bead. So that way these seed beads that I've added will hug the cathedral bead. And let's continue that. I'll go through the 8 right next to it. I'll add on 6 more seed beads. And I will go through the 8 on the other side. All right, I'm going to continue that down the length of the bracelet. I've now gone the full length of my bracelet. It has the embellishment all the way down that side. My thread is coming out of the last 8 bead. I need to bring my thread over to the other side so I can do the embellishment once again. So I'm going to go through the 8mm cathedral, making sure I just keep my tail thread out of the way so it doesn't get tangled. Go through the 8 as well. And now let's do the embellishment on the other side. So this works exactly the same as the other side. So we're coming out of the 8 that is hugging this cathedral. So now I can add 6 seed beads. And bring those down and my needle through the 8 on the other side. Go through the 8-0 next to that. Pick up 6 more. And then bring my needle through the 8-0 on the other side. And I will continue this down the length of my bracelet. So that way the embellishment is on both sides. We've now added our embellishment, well, the first stage of our embellishment on both sides of the bracelet. You could definitely stop here in terms of this seed bead trim if you like kind of just the simple dome look. But we're going to continue and make the trim a little more special, have a little bit more to it. Now is when we're going to add what you might call the little peaks to each of our dome. So when I was finishing up that part of the trim, I came out of this 8-0 seed bead. Now I need to get back to the top, so I'm going to go through the cathedral bead. And now we are going to add those little peaks. So the way that you do that is so as you can see, there are 8 seed beads in total around this cathedral bead. I want to have this little peak added right in the center. So I'm going to go through 4 of these. So right now I'm just going through that first one. And let's see if I can go through. Yeah, I can go through the next 3 all together. So I've gone through a total of 4 seed beads. I'm going to pick up one more 8-0 seed bead. And then I'm going to go down the other side, going through the 4 on this side. Pull that tight. And you've got your first little peak. And that is what makes this trim really stand out on this bracelet. So let's continue that. We're going to go through the 4 on this side of this cathedral. It often is easier just to go through that first bead on its own and then go through the next 3. But in total, you are going through 4 of these seed beads. Pick up one new one and go through the 4 on the other side. And now you can see that trim really starting to develop. Let's keep going. Let's go through the next 4. I will pick up one. And if you want, you definitely can start by just bringing that one that you add all the way to the end, if that is easier for you. And then you can go through the next 4. That is definitely an option. All right, I'm going to continue that down the length of the bracelet. We have now finished the trim on one side, and I want to add that same embellishment to the other side. I'm coming out of my last 8-0 seed bead here. I'm going to go through the cathedral bead to get to the other side of this bracelet, and now I can continue the exact same pattern. So I can go just like before. I'm going to go through the first 4 of the seed beads, pick up one, and then go through the 4 on the other side to add that little peak. So I'm bringing my needle through the first 4 on that side, adding 1 seed bead, and then going back down the 4 on the other side. Pull that snug and you've got your peak. Let's go through the next 4. Add 1 seed bead and go through the next 4. Here I'm going through the next 4 again. Going through that first one first, just because that's a little easier sometimes, and then that next 3 to get to it. So I'm going through 4 in total. Picking up 1 seed bead and going down the next 4. And I will continue that the length of my bracelet. I've now added the trim on both sides. That step is complete. And now we are ready to add the links and the clasps on each end to really finish off this bracelet. So first I am going to go through the cathedral bead. I'm going to pick up one of my stitch and links. These are from Czech Glass and they have a really beautiful hammer tone texture on them. So in the written directions, we have diagrams of this step as well, which I think helps to see it. But of course, we're going to go through it now. So to start, I'm going to go through this loop and going from the inside. You can see that there. Now I'm going to pick up 3 8/0 seed beads. I have picked up 3 of them. Let's bring that down my thread. And then I'm going to take my needle and go back through the cathedral bead. Sometimes you kind of have to push these beads into place. The goal is to kind of have like a little square of beads there. And as you reinforce it, it helps them settle into place as well. All right, I'm coming out of the cathedral bead, and now we need to get things attached on the other side. Let's start by adding 3 more seed beads. There are 3 more on my needle. I'll bring those down, and then I can go through the loop, the other loop on this link, and back through the cathedral bead. So now we have attached the link, but it is good to reinforce this a few times just to help it stay very secure, as well as to kind of get the beads into place. So we're just going to follow that exact same thread path. 2 more times is good, and then we'll be finished on this side of the bracelet. So I'm coming out of the cathedral bead here, and I am going to follow this same thread path. Doesn't really matter if I kind of on each of these sides which way I go. So I'm just going to go through the 3 seed beads, through the loop, and back through the cathedral bead. And here's where I think it's a lot easier to start to pull a little tighter and get those to sit nicely. Do the same over here. Go through the 3 seed beads, go through the loop of the link, and back through the cathedral. Just getting that thread out of the way. And then we will just do that one more time. And back through the cathedral. And let's reinforce it on this side for the last time. Going through the seed beads and through the link and back through the cathedral. All right, I've now gone through, and that that thread path a total of 3 times, the initial time that I added it, as well as twice more. So now we just basically want to get rid of the rest of our thread. So we're going to weave this in and add a couple half hitch knots to tie it off, and then we can cut it off. So I'm just going to follow my existing thread path back into the bracelet. So I'm just going to go through one 8/0 bead, that first 8/0, as well as through the cathedral bead that's next to it. And now I'll add 2 half hitch knots here. And one more. And then you could weave it through and cut it off. I'm gonna weave through and do a couple more knots just to be extra secure, and I can show you what I'm doing there. So I'm just weaving through a couple more beads. And then with this half hitch knot, you're basically adding a knot around your existing thread path. So I'm taking my needle, I'm going underneath the thread path that is right here. And before I pull all the way through, you can see this loop that's developing. Before I pull it all the way through and that loop disappears, I'm taking my needle and going through that loop and then pulling tight. And that way I have added a knot around my thread path. Let me do that one more time. I'm going to go underneath the thread path, so just meaning underneath the thread that's there. That forms a loop here, and I'm going to go through the loop. There are lots of really great videos on half hitch knots on YouTube, so if you search half hitch knot, you can get a close-up of doing that specific step. Now I am going to just, since I did the knot right there, I don't want to cut it off right where I did that knot. I'm just going to go through a couple more beads, and then I am just going to cut my extra thread as close as possible, making sure not to cut any other threads. And there we go. We have our component on one end, and now we're just going to do the same in the other end. And that is why we left this tail, and that's why we wanted it to be 10 to 12 inches. So we had plenty of room to work with as we add this to the other side. So I'm going to add my needle onto this side. I might clean up this edge a little bit. So decided to just cut that off. There was kind of a little bit fraying. I like to clamp it down with some sort of flat nose pliers. That just makes it a lot easier to add my needle. So now I've added my needle onto the tail side, and I'm ready to do exactly the same thing that we did on this side and now over here. So let me grab the other stitch in link. We started by going through the loop, going from the inside to the outside. Then we added 3 seed beads. Brought those down, and then we went back through the cathedral from the same side that the thread is exiting. And now we are going to do the same, pretty similar on the other side. I'm going to add 3 seed beads. Go through the other loop of the stitch in link, and then go back through the cathedral bead. And if you're wanting to see this kind of step by step, I also recommend checking out the diagrams in the PDF, so you can see it from another view as well. And now I'm going to reinforce this by going through the whole thread path 2 more times before I weave in and knot this off. I have now reinforced that thread path, so I am ready to weave in my thread and knot it off. So I'm just going to follow some of our existing thread paths, so just some of the existing ways that our thread has already gone. I'll add a couple of, oh, that didn't work. I just went a little too fast there. I'm going to add a couple of half hitch knots just by going under that thread there and then bringing my needle through the loop that's made before it disappears, pulling that tight. Go through that, make 2 knots there. And since my thread is getting short here, I'm just going to weave that through a couple more beads and tie it off. My needle came off, so I'll just put it back on. Just bringing it through a couple more beads just so I don't cut the thread right next to the knot. Take off my needle and let's trim the extra thread. And there we go. We have added on our links. We have finished all of our beading, and now we just need to add the clasp. All right, we're going to wrap this up by adding the clasp. I have here the kind of hammer tone, simple magnetic clasp from Tierra Cast. So I'm going to separate that into 2 pieces, and I'm going to attach each side of the clasp to each end just using a jump ring. So if you want this to be a 7-inch bracelet, you just need to add 1 3x4mm oval jump ring to each end and add the clasp. In my case, I want to make it just slightly longer than that. So I'm actually going to add 2 jump rings to both ends. Just opening and closing that jump ring. And you could have added the clasp right onto there, but just to make mine a little bit longer, I'm going to open a second one for this side as well. Hook that on to that jump ring and then on to the clasp. And now we have that attached on one side. I really like using the oval jump rings as opposed to the round ones. I think they're just a little bit kind of a stronger one to use, and that's because that opening that's there is now on the side and it's not where these the pieces are getting pulled, and so they're not pulling right where the opening is, which could happen sometimes if you use a round jump ring. So the oval ones are just a really nice option. So now let's go to the other side. And again, you could just add 1 jump ring here. I'm going to add 2. Just hook that on to the stitch in link, close that up. 1 more jump ring. I'll hook it on to both the clasp and the other jump ring, close that up. And I'm using my fingers and 1 clasp and 1 flat nose pliers. You could definitely do this with 2 flat nose pliers as an option as well. You'll see that the trim can kind of move around a bit, which is totally fine. I mean, once it's on your wrist, it kind of lays there. But now we have our finished bracelet. And there we go. That is how it looks. We have our cathedral beads. This is the garnet color with the copper wash. We have the rose gold Toho 80 seed beads that give that kind of copper look to them. And then we have our Tierra Cast components on the back side, our stitch-in links, and our clasp. And that is how you make the Venice bracelet. I will show off just a few of the other variations I have. The other one is this exact same design that I showed off earlier. This one is with the aqua capri glass, that beautiful blue tone. One option is to make this bracelet using 6mm cathedral beads. It makes it just a little bit lighter, a little bit thinner, a little bit of that kind of, a smaller bracelet on your wrist. For this, the main change that you'll need to make is to use 11 seed beads instead of 8. Those are just a good fit in size to go around the 6mm cathedrals. but then you can follow the pattern exactly the same. You do end up making, kind of more rings going down. So for this one, I think this ended up being a 6 3/4 inch bracelet with still that 2 inches on the end for the components and clasp. And let's see how many rings we have here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So a couple more times of going around and making those loops of cathedral beads. Just since they are smaller, you have to do a couple more to get to that length. And now I chose to do these all with cathedral beads. I mean, I just think it's a really great way to showcase that Czech glass bead. But there are other options of beads that you can use. You can also use faceted rounds. In this case, I actually decided to use a gemstone. That was a great way to feature these beads. These are in an 8mm round size. Paired this with a more silver toned seed bead. And you could do this with any 8mm faceted round, whether that's a gemstone or some Czech glass. Thank you so much for joining me today as we made the Venice bracelet with this seed beading technique. I hope you enjoyed learning how to make this. I can't wait to see your versions. Definitely post what you make to our Facebook group. That's the Gem Chat Facebook group. We would love to see what you're making, to see how you got inspired. And if you want to pick up these beads, I've got information in the description of this video, or you can head over to samsbeadshop.com to pick up some of these beads and components for yourself. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.